Back in prehistoric times, when I was sitting in my high school English class, I had a problem with something I was taught. Well, I had problems with a lot of what I was taught, but let's focus on just this one thing today. My teachers all taught that conflict can be internal, external, or with a force beyond your control. At the time, something about that felt off, but I couldn't quite articulate why. Now, many years later, I think I get it. Like a lot of things that are presented to us as discrete buckets when we're kids, conflicts exist on a spectrum, or really two spectra in this case. Conflicts range from entirely personal and individual problems to complex, deeply entrenched systemic problems. They also range from minor inconveniences to world-ending catastrophes. And on top of that, they're not points, they're blobs. Take a tornado in a small, remote desert town, for instance. The tornado is a catastrophic personal problem because it might kill you. But it's also an interpersonal problem because it might kill your friends and neighbors or destroy their houses. And then, once it's gone, the tornado might also become a systemic problem because it cut the landline telephone cable and your town doesn't have mobile coverage. So now the decision of the telecommunications company to not provide your town with coverage is inextricably linked with the rescue and recovery effort following the tornado because it's much harder than it should be to get external help. So if we were to represent the space that conflicts can exist in as a Cartesian plane, with one axis from personal and individual to systemic, and one from minor to catastrophic, we can see that the tornado really isn't just a point. But conflicts can also just be points. Like if my arch nemesis is pointing a gun at my head, it's pretty much just a me problem. It's definitely towards the catastrophic end of the spectrum, but my arch nemesis's murderous obsession is exclusively about me, and we absolutely do not bring other people into it. This is a closed adversarial relationship, thank you very much. Anyway, you get my point. Point, because it's a point on the graph. Now, I don't think this whole Cartesian plane of conflict is actually directly useful for writers. I'm just using it as a convenient analytical tool for this video because it makes it really easy to demonstrate how every conflict has a sort of problem space that it operates in. And the argument that I'm making, the sort of central thesis of this video, is that if you, as a writer, tell the audience that a problem is solved, you have to show us a solution that believably covers that whole problem space, or at least the part of the problem space that you're telling us is solved. For instance, in Saving Private Ryan, the main cast don't end World War II. They just make sure that the titular Private Ryan is able to make it home so his family doesn't lose all its sons. World War II would cover, like, the entirety of the Cartesian plane, but the film doesn't claim to have solved the whole problem space. It only claims to have solved this one little bit, which is why it works. Or at least it's an indispensable building block towards making sure the resolution to the conflict is satisfying. Many other elements of writing work together to make it a satisfying conclusion, like character agency, consequences of decisions, and a bunch of other things, but that's not what this video is about. So let's get back to the main point of problems and solutions. So you understand now what I mean by covering the problem space. So let's briefly talk about a story that fails to do that. And this is a critique that's been made a million times before, so I'm going to keep it short. But anyway, Harry Potter. Spoilers, by the way. Voldemort's rise to power is quite explicitly enabled by significant systemic issues in British magical society. Just to quickly name two examples. First, Rowling directly critiques the inequality between humans and other highly intelligent magical beings like elves, goblins, and centaurs. There's even a whole scene with a statue that overtly reinforces that hierarchy. It is with the help of those oppressed groups that Voldemort is able to seize control. Then secondly, the Daily Prophet is presented as the only widely consumed news media, and it's directly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. And since the Ministry doesn't want to acknowledge the return of Voldemort, they use the Daily Prophet to smear Harry and Dumbledore. Then, when the Death Eaters gain control over the Ministry, they use that state-controlled media to push their own propaganda. The systemic problems in Wizarding Society are essential to Voldemort's rise to power. They need to be fixed if you want the audience to believe that another Voldemort won't use the exact same strategies to seize power in 20 years' time. So, how does Rowling deal with that? I'm sure she has a brilliant solution, right? Well, no. Voldemort is killed by his own reflected killing curse, then we get a brief description of the aftermath of the battle and a list of which named characters died. Then it's 19 years later and all is well. Sapient non-humans are still an oppressed class, the media is still state-controlled, but the good guys are the propagandizing oppressors now, so all is well. To that I say, no. You can't set up and actively critique a broken system that enables the rise of a fascist dictator, then tell the audience that the death of that dictator solves all the problems. Absolutely not. You set up this problem space, now you have to lie in it. But examples of bad writing are not as helpful as examples of good writing. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of books that do a good job addressing the problem space they set up, in order of increasing systemicness. That's a word now, I decided. And we're going to stick with fantasy novels because I like fantasy, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Going forward from here, spoilers for A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin, Rowan of Rin by Emily Rodda, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and Kith and Kin by Marieke Nijkamp. A Wizard of Earthsea does present a few systemic problems to the audience, but I'm going to focus on the major personal problem faced by Ged, that being the Shadow. Ged is proud and arrogant, and accidentally summons the Shadow in a duel with another wizard. He spends a large portion of the novel running away from the Shadow, even as he solves other problems, like getting the Dragons of Pendor to promise to stop attacking the people of the 90 Isles. Everything else is sort of a side quest, because the resolution requires Ged to directly confront the Shadow and give it a name, and the name he gives it is Ged. This represents humility. Ged recognizes that he cannot be rid of the Shadow, and that he must set aside his pride and claim responsibility for his past mistakes. The fundamental problem here was that Ged was prideful and arrogant, and the solution is for him to learn humility, a deeply personal solution for a deeply personal problem. Next, Rowan of Rin, which is a series of 5 middle-grade fantasy novellas by Emily Rodda. They follow Rowan, who lives in the village of Rin. The people of Rin value physical strength above everything else. But Rowan is small and weak. His greatest strength is empathy. And he's also pretty smart. Like, not super genius level smart, but he's got a good brain inside his little head. The villagers see Rowan as a disappointment. And they don't think he's capable of anything more than his job as the keeper of the Booksher, which are basically very gentle, extremely easy to manage Highland cows, if Highland cows were grey instead of brown. Rowan is shunned because he's not physically strong, But throughout the 5 books, Rowan ends up being forced to go on various important quests where, in the end, it's his empathy and wit that save the day. Primarily the former. In the first book in the series, Rin's river runs dry and a group is sent up the mountain to find out why and fix it so the people of Rin don't die of thirst. Rowan has to go with them, because the map given to the questers by the village wise woman is enchanted, so it can only be read while he's holding it. And it's also impossible to copy it. Yes, they thought of that. All the questers, except Rowan and John, who is Rowan's stepfather, end up turning back when they're faced with their greatest fears. Rowan, who is afraid of just about everything, makes it to the top of the mountain with John and finds the dragon whose fire melts the ice on the mountain and feeds the river. John would absolutely have been ready to throw hands with the dragon if he weren't injured by crawling through a too small tunnel. But Rowan realized that there was a bone stuck in the back of the dragon's throat and chose to help it. Then the dragon breathes fire all around, which restarts the river, and John and Rowan ride it all the way back down to Rin, where the attitudes of the villagers start to shift and they start to learn to value empathy and wit just as much as strength, though it takes a few more books to completely convince them. The real systemic issue of the Rowan of Rin series is that the villagers of Rin overvalue strength and undervalue empathy and wit. The solution is for Rowan to prove that empathy and wit are just as important by applying those very qualities to repeatedly save Rin and consequently challenge the villagers' prejudices. So, in A Wizard of Earthsea, Ged's conflict is deeply personal and internal, so it makes sense for the solution to be the same. In the same way, in Rowan of Rin, the overarching conflict is the prejudice of the people around Rowan, which he overcomes through visible actions that prove his qualities have value. Now, it's not necessarily a great message for kids that if people are mean to you, you should repeatedly solve their problems for them to prove you have value, but it does directly align with the problem space that Rodder defined, which is why it works as a resolution. So now we've seen individual pride and arrogance in Earthsea and community prejudice in Rowan of Rin, and now we're going to look at broad cultural and political complacency in The Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to look at the whole of The Lord of the Rings, though, just the Scouring of the Shire, which you might not be familiar with if you've only watched the films, because Peter Jackson left it out of his adaptation. The Scouring of the Shire is just one chapter in The Lord of the Rings. In my copy that I have, it's 23 pages long. In this chapter, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin return to the Shire and find that Sharky, who is actually Saruman, has seized power by mobilizing a group of thugs and bullies. Due to the complacent culture of the Shire, most of the hobbits have just rolled over and accepted Saruman's rule, even though he's lost his magic and is just an ordinary man operating as a politician. I chose the Scouring of the Shire for this video because it offers an excellent counterpoint to Harry Potter, where Voldemort dies and that's treated as a solution to all the Wizarding World's problems. Tolkien takes a different approach with this chapter. Sauron is very much defeated at this point. The One Ring is gone, and Sauron's essence is spread so thin that he will never be able to reform. The Scouring demonstrates that the defeat of one big bad evil guy doesn't solve all the problems in the world. The Shire's complacency still leaves it vulnerable, so Merry and Pippin have to rally the hobbits to stand up for themselves and take back their land from Saruman and his bullies. Then, in the subsequent and final chapter of The Lord of the Rings, the hobbits have to clean up all the damage Saruman caused. There has to be a cleanup because beating the bullies and killing Saruman and Wormtongue still leaves a scar on the land, the people, and their culture. The Scouring of the Shire presents a problem of political complacency, solves that problem by rallying the people into collective action, then doesn't shy away from the longer-term consequences. The solution of collective action didn't fully cover the problem space, but the story is honest about that and shows us the ongoing work afterwards. Not every problem in a story has to be solved. It's more of a matter of authorial integrity, that you need to be honest about which problems are solved by the solutions you present to your audience. Sometimes those solutions won't solve any problems and might cause more. That's how tragedies work. Tragedies have sad endings because the hero attempts a solution that's a complete mismatch for the problem, and if they're well written, those sad endings are satisfying. And that brings me to my final example, which isn't quite a tragedy since the ending is broadly hopeful, but there are tragic elements. Kith and Kin by Marieke Nijkamp is a prequel to The Legend of Vox Machina by Critical Role that explores one of the early adventures of Vex and Vax. The twins end up entangled in the absolute mess of Joran Village. Initially, we're introduced to the Shadewatch, who control the village, and the miners, who are treated as outlaws and hide in the mines. The two factions each represent compelling arguments for why they're hostile to the other, and a complex web of relationships, mistakes, violence, scheming, and blackmail is slowly revealed to the reader. Vex and Vax have to come up with a solution that fits everyone, and in the end, they can't. Culwyn, the brother of Shademaster Derowyn, simply cannot be reasoned with. He's so deep into scams and blackmail that when he learns that Vex and Vax know what he's been doing, he murders his sister to cover his tracks, then tries to kill the twins, but fails and ends up dead himself. Vex and Vax try to repair the rift between the villagers and the miners by telling them the whole truth of the situation, but the mutual hurt runs too deep, and Thorn, the leader of the miners, says that he and his people will likely leave to find homes elsewhere, which is actually what they wanted to do from the beginning, but they wouldn't have been able to settle anywhere since Derowyn would have made sure that they would be recognized as outlaws wherever they tried to go. Derowyn's right hand, Wick, is given authority over the Shadewatch and has to take care of Derowyn's orphaned daughter, Aswyn. But he recognizes that there's a lot of work to be done to rebuild trust after all the corruption that's just come to light. When Vex and Vax leave Joran, it's clear that the necessary structural reform is only just beginning, and there's no certainty that Wick and Thorn will even achieve their respective goals. Kith and Kin presents a system so complicated and so broken in so many different ways that no single solution could ever fix everything wrong with it. And the story is honest about that. Vex and Vax do what they can, but in the end, their solution only covers a small section of the problem space, and it's up to the people of Joran to do the rest. Kith and Kin has a complicated systemic problem, and it requires a systemic solution. All four of the examples I've just gone through do something similar. They match their solution to the problem space they've established, whether it's personal, systemic, somewhere in between, or a mix. And they're honest when there are parts left unresolved. That's what makes a resolution satisfying. It's also why the endings of some stories just feel empty, like, as I already discussed, how Harry Potter presents a systemic problem, then tries to claim to have solved it with a personal solution. It would be very easy to make a long list of stories where the resolution presented to the audience is fundamentally mismatched with the problem it purports to solve, but this video is long enough already, and I think I've managed to explain why the idea of conflict falling into three discrete buckets has always felt so wrong to me, which is all I really wanted to achieve with this. Conflict exists on a broad spectrum, and there's only a certain extent to which audiences can suspend our disbelief when we're presented with solutions. So, authors, when you want us to believe that a problem is solved, show your work. That's all it really takes.